Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Kiwi Ears KE4. This is a $200 hybrid IEM with 2 dynamic drivers, 2 balanced armatures, and maybe more importantly, this is just a good example or a good opportunity for us to talk about this new meta that you might have heard about. This is a term that some people were throwing around, including myself, and I thought that the KE4 was just a good example of the new meta and a good reason for us to talk about the new meta in meta. That's a little bit meta. Anyway, what do we mean by the new meta? Just to step back a bit, all right? A meta, the term is a term that I first kind of encountered in the context of competitive video gaming, actually, where it was used, the term was used to describe just kind of like emergent, ubiquitous, common strategies that are used to win a video game, okay? Let me maybe put that in a little bit more concrete detail or example. I'm about to upset some soccer fans, I apologize, but let's take the game of soccer, all right? Or football, as a lot of people call it. The game of soccer is to, or like the main goal is to kick the ball through the goal of the opponent the most times, right? That's kind of the game. And there's a bunch of rules, but really kind of like the meta game of soccer is to pretend that you're playing soccer and then pretend to get hurt and then take penalty kicks and get the most goals that way, right? That's kind of like an example of a meta game. In the audio world, let's say the game is just to make the best sounding headphones, right? And sell the most headphones because you've made the best sounding headphone. And there's a number of different meta strategies that you can have. If you're KZ, your meta strategy can be throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, see what sticks. Or, you know, over the past couple of years, the kind of dominant meta strategy has been the Harman target, right? Which is it's kind of like a scientific approach to it, right? It's like, let's prioritize frequency response. Let's scientifically find out which frequency response appeals to the most number of people. And then let's try to make headphones and IEMs that match that frequency response and then bring down the price, right? That's kind of been the past or the meta that we've been operating under for the past couple of years. And I would say that that's kind of still the current meta. But the new meta is kind of a response to that, okay? And I think to understand the new meta, you kind of just have to imagine or understand 2 main issues that people have with the Harman target. Okay, and I talked about the Harman target earlier this year, but I think there's kind of 2 main issues, especially when it comes to IEMs, less so with headphones, but maybe a little bit with headphones too. But with IEMs in particular, the Harman target just ends up sounding a little bit thin in the lower mid-range and also a little bit mid-bass light, right? So things like kick drums, well, you might have like a lot of sub-bass emphasis, so like electronic music sounds wubby, but with the Harman target, kick drums and more classically rock music or something like that might lack some of that body and that physicality that people like. And then in sort of the top end of the frequency response with the Harman target, it's a little bit excessive in the lower treble, which can add kind of an edginess to vocals, maybe make it sound a little bit unnatural. It does add maybe an excitement to it, but those kind of 2 things in combination make the Harman target, for a lot of people, and myself included, sound a little bit V-shaped, okay? So this new meta is emerging, which is basically just a new target frequency response. I know the headphones.com crew has been working a lot with the new B&K 5128 rig, diffuse field tilted. You don't need to understand all of that, but what you do need to understand, or what's worth at least understanding, is that the new meta is trying to fix Harman, all right? We're trying to do things better than Harman. And the KE4 is an IEM that I think very closely matches this new meta tuning philosophy. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But I guess before we get to that, a quick shout out to Linsol for sending in the KE4 for review. If you want to check out the KE4, I've got them linked in the description down below. But what we are going to do is we're going to talk about the physical form factor, build quality, fit and comfort, and then we'll talk about the sound here on the KE4, and I'll bring in some other IEMs for comparison because I have been listening to this for the past few weeks and listening to it versus some other IEMs. And I'll tell you exactly what I think about not just the KE4, but also this new meta in general. Is it a better thing? Is it a worse thing? Let's get into it. So, physical form factor, box, packaging, here you go. Here's the box, nice and small, nice and simple. I dig it. Thank you, Kiwi Ears, for keeping it simple. Now, what you get inside the box is also fairly simple, which may be a little bit too simple for 200 bucks, if I'm honest, but it's not bad. So these ear tips that it comes with, it's just the 1 set of silicone ear tips, but they are like a unique bespoke ear tip that Kiwi Ears is making. I've actually been curious to try these ear tips out for a while because I've seen that they're selling these things separately, and it's just, you know, a fairly short silicone ear tip that has kind of a spin fit-ish mechanism to the nozzle, and it's also got this unique mesh pattern on top. They are a pretty decent ear tip. Although you might notice I'm not using them on this particular IEM. It has nothing to do with the ear tips not being good, just that for my particular ear, I found a different ear tip to be a better fit, and we'll talk about why while I put these things away. Apart from that, you get a little carry case, which is nice and small. I dig this. So you can see maybe a little bit on the compact side for these IEMs. So some people might be stressed that you're crushing your IEMs. Don't be worried about it. This thing is great. I like that it's pocketable. You can throw this in a bag, doesn't take up too much space. I dig that. Thank you, Kiwi Ears, for that. But apart from that stuff, you get the IEM itself, and that'll let us talk about the build quality, starting with the cable, which is a pretty decent cable. You can see that the behavior on it is quite nice. Like, it's not particularly memory prone. It's not stiff. It does have a decent drape to it, but it is a little bit on the kinky side, which might not totally come through, but trust me, it's a little bit on the kinky side. It's a little bit on the thin side. And I'm also just kind of not a big fan of the match of the colors on this. Mostly it's just, I feel like this hardware is a little bit too blingy for me, but maybe a little bit picky. More so, I find that the heat shrinked ear hooks up here just make it look a little bit cheaper than it is. You know, it's a decent cable. You don't need to replace it, but if you want to, it is a standard 2-pin connector, so you can throw on a Truth Ear gate cable. If you want to get crazy, that might be what I did personally as I was listening to this, but there you go. It's a decent cable. The earpieces themselves, I would say, are kind of similarly, like, pretty well done, although there is something to the aesthetic that feels a little bit cheaper than maybe the $200 price point. Like, it's nice and simple on the outside, which I guess I dig. I don't know, it's just, it's kind of low effort, but, you know, you can certainly make a worse looking IEM. The shells themselves are, I think, an opaque black, and you can see that they are kind of a semi-custom molded design, which will play into the fit and comfort, which I'll show you in a little bit. But yeah, just suffice to say, aesthetically, it is a fine looking IEM, but it's also a little bit on the plain, unfinished side. I don't know, it almost looks like a prototype. Anyway, let me take this ear tip off real quick, and I'll just kind of give you a look at the nozzle. The nozzle itself does not look particularly long, but there is something about kind of the overall bulk and the heft of this earpiece that does make this end up feeling a little bit deeper in my ear, or a little bit longer in my ear than it looks necessarily here to the eye. And that's actually why I swapped out ear tips. So the stock ear tips are already kind of a short nozzle silicone ear tip, but I found that going with an even shorter ear tip, which is what we have here, just worked better for me. That your mileage may vary on that. You might not be an issue for you in particular, but for me, I found that having an even shorter ear tip worked for me. And this is a final E-type TWS ear tip if you're curious. But yeah, all right, let's talk about fit in my ear before we get to talking about the sound. And I'll punch in so you can see it up close. Size-wise, I would say that this is medium-ish, medium-large-ish in terms of size. Like, it doesn't feel, especially once I've got this shorter ear tip on here, I would say it feels like a medium. It was with the stock ear tip and maybe any longer ear tips, it's going to feel a little bit bulkier, at least in my ear, and I think that will probably be true for a lot of other people. But otherwise, once I got that shorter ear tip on it, fit on this thing is fantastic. And Kiwi Ears generally does really nice shaped IEMs that just happen to, you know, drop into the folds of my ear. You get this little anti-tragus catch there, holding it in place. The fit security is fantastic. Comfort is fantastic. The only thing is that it is a little bit on the thick side, so it does protrude a little bit from the ear. So if you're looking for something that you can lie down on your side, right, side sleep on, this is a fine IEM for that, I suppose, but it's a little bit on the bulky side, and it might be a little bit uncomfortable. But overall, I generally find this to be a very comfortable IEM, and I dig the build quality on it. It's a little bit on the lightweight side too, which I guess I forgot to mention. But I don't know, I don't think there's anything else I can talk about the physical form factor, so let me wrap this baby up and let's start talking about the sound. And like I mentioned, this thing fits into what we're gonna call the new meta. Let me jump over here to Squiglink. If you wanna check all this stuff out, I've got it linked in the description down below. But what I have up here is just, this is the Harman target, right? Again, this is the target that we've all been kind of used to. And the standout characteristics are it's a little bit thin down here in the lower mid-range and a little bit bright up here in the upper mid-range vocal region. Now, let me throw this up. This is the tilted diffuse field target, which is, again, this is a good representation of what we mean by the new meta. I think there's various interpretations of it, but this is a good example. And you can see that down here in the lower mid-range, there's quite a bit more body to that lower mid-range, right? This is a lot fuller, a lot higher in amplitude versus the Harman target, which dips down and gives you that thinness. And then up here in that lower treble region, you can see that the new meta is giving us a more relaxed lower treble, which again, can give it just kind of like a, I mean, the overall gist of this sound signature difference between the new meta and the Harman target is the Harman target can sound a little bit V-shaped, a little bit exciting, sub-bass boosted and lower treble boosted, whereas this new meta is going for a lower contrast, warmer, more relaxed tuning, which may or may not actually be what you're looking for. But I guess I digress because that's more or less what this IEM gives you. So let me pull this up real quick. This is the frequency response of the Kiwi Ears KE4. Again, I've got this linked in the description down below if you want to check it out, but you can also just check it out here and you can see that here I'm using the Super 22 target, which is slightly different than the diffuse field target that we were just looking at before, but basically the same in the important ways. You can see that, you know, again, my target's giving it a little bit more fullness here in the lower mid-range and less treble here versus the thinner line, which is the Harman target. And that is exactly what the Kiwi Ears KE4 is giving us as well. Where the Kiwi Ears differs a little bit in terms of this new meta target, I mean, you could see maybe a little bit of a difference up here. I wouldn't read too much into this because this stuff can really vary depending on your ear shape, the measurement rig itself. And it's also just that level of change is not massive. But here, this is actually a pretty big change, right? So you see there's quite a bit of bass boost here on the Kiwi Ears KE4. Now, I would not necessarily describe this as like a bass monster. This is not a bass cannon IEM by any stretch of the imagination, but you can see that it does have more bass. And importantly, versus like the Harman target, it's got, you know, similar sub bass levels to the Harman target, but quite a bit more mid bass, right? And also because it has more mid bass and less thinness here in the lower mid-range, you're just generally getting a fuller, thicker sound versus the traditional Harman target. And that's more or less the sound signature that you should expect here with the KE4. Let me pull up my notes. All right, in terms of my subjective listening impressions, tonality-wise, this thing's pretty stinking spot on, especially if I'm listening to vocal first content. So lately I've been listening to a lot of Feist, actually, she's an artist I listened to a long time ago for a lot, and then I fell out of Feist, and I just realized she has a new album out now that has some really nice vocal recordings. She has fantastic vocals, by the way, and listening to them here on the KE4 with that mid-range tuning, that new meta mid-range tuning, and I apologize if you're getting sick of that term. I'm also getting a little bit sick of it, but it's nonetheless useful. With this tuning, Feist vocals sound fantastic, like just really easy, low contrast, but like detailed, natural, like it sounds positionally in terms of its relation to the rest of the music, just like perfect, well balanced. It's really well done. And there's maybe a little bit of, I don't want to call it hotness. The word I wrote is like frothiness in kind of the mid treble region on the tuning on this IEM. In fact, let's pull that up again. Nope, that's not it. There you go. What I'm referring to is here. There's a little bit of, we'll call this frothiness on this IEM that can actually give it, you know, some nice sense of texturing to that vocal. I like that frothiness. I'm okay with that. But yeah, it gives it a good sense of texturing and just kind of that micro contrast detail to that otherwise somewhat low contrast tonal bounce. I really dig that stuff. Now, the bass is probably where this thing is frankly the weakest, okay? And then it's not necessarily in the levels of bass because there are other IEMs I've heard that are bassier or less bassy that don't have kind of the bass qualities or lack of qualities that this thing has. Okay, I would say that the bass in the KE4 is a little bit on the bloomy and poofy side, right? Just when you're listening to, okay, Feist, not super bass heavy music, but I've also been listening to a lot of Cigarettes After Sex. They've also got a new album out, coincidentally, and it also really good vocal content, but they've also got a lot of really heavy bass guitar in that music. And with this particular IEM, because of the bass emphasis and the way that you've got like this low contrast mid-range plus a lot of mid bass, it just gives it, it's like a bit of a soft, bloomy transition that kind of lacks some of that physicality and for lack of a better word, dynamic feeling that you can get with some other more contrasty sound signatures. So that's just kind of a trade-off with this particular tuning, is that you get, again, that really nice, soft, easy, laid back, but like detailed and natural sounding mid-range. And you get the bass boost, but it's coming kind of at the expense of just sounding a little bit soft in the bass. Now, it doesn't really intrude too much in the mid-range itself. The mid-range continues to sound good even with that somewhat bloomy bass. It's more just that the bass quality itself is not super engaging because of that. It's a little bit droning, and it just lacks kind of that density and punch that you can get out of some other different tunings. So yeah. The imaging on this IEM, however, I would say is actually pretty decent. It's not fantastic, it's not standout. And maybe even if you're listening to it strictly versus another more Harman sounding IEM, I probably should have compared this to the Kiwi Ears Quintet, which is frequency response wise, it doesn't look that Harman, but sound wise in my ears, it very much sounds Harman. That sounds more V-shaped and maybe a little bit more impressive in terms of its imaging versus the KE4, because the KE4 is just, it's a little bit more laid back and a little bit more mellow and tame in that respect, but still actually pretty good, I think. It doesn't sound especially bright, but again, it does have a little bit of that froth in the mid treble, which again, I mostly heard as just giving a decent sense of texturing to the mid range. And I would say that the treble's not especially sharp or incisive or aggressive. It's generally a pretty safe treble, and it's also not especially relaxed or dark or anything like that. I think that the treble tuning in this thing is actually a nice balance. And really, the mid-range is also a really nice balance in terms of its tuning. It really is just the bass that is a little bit of a letdown on this IEM. So what did I want to compare this thing to? All right, let's pop out these IEMs. I should have taken them out of their cases before now, but let's do this. There's actually one other IEM I want to compare it to that I don't have here on hand. So we're going to use this cable as a stand-in for it, all right? You're going to have to use your imagination with this one because this represents an IEM. But here we've got the Kiwi Ears KE4, 200 bucks. Here we've got the AFU Explorer, another hybrid IEM at just 130 bucks, a little bit cheaper. Here we've got the Truth Ear Hexa, another hybrid IEM, a lot cheaper at $80. And then here this represents the binary cross Giz Audio Chopin, which is also 200 bucks, and that's why I want to compare it. And also the Chopin is, it's basically Harman, okay? And that's why this head-to-head would actually be kind of interesting if I had the Chopin on hand. Mine's on loan, but we're going to make that comparison anyway. Okay, how these things compare and why I've got these all on the table is that, well, the Truth Ear Hexa, in a lot of ways, is kind of like the original nu meta tuning IEM. You look at it in a frequency response, like this came about before all this like nu meta speak came up. But if you look at the frequency response, like it's basically bang on to that frequency response. And that's, I think, explains why this thing sounds so good. The Explorer is a little bit different of a sound signature. It's kind of relaxed in the vocal region more so than these guys. Like all of these have more of a vocal forward sound. This is a little bit more relaxed and a little bit warmer and bassier tilted. But I wanted to bring this one up because this is a good example of an IEM that's bassier than the KE4, at least in terms of overall balance. But I feel like the bass is nonetheless like tighter, more impactful, more incisive, and just more engaging on the Explorer. So if you're looking for that bassy tune, the Explorer does, I think, the better job of that. The Chopin, again, use your imagination. This one's basically Harman tuning, although in listening experience, and this is where it's kind of interesting, like I mentioned, the Quintet doesn't really graph that Harman, but it sounds pretty Harman. The Chopin graphs very Harman, and I find that it actually sounds a little bit warmer than Harman. So it doesn't have quite that thinness problem that I have with a lot of them. So this one, we're still going to say represents Harman, but this is like more of the warmer, fuller version of Harman versus the thinner, brighter version of Harman. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of how they all stack up in terms of tonality. I would say that, again, these two are the ones that most closely represent the nu meta tuning. This one, the Hexa, is less bassy. than the Kiwi Ears. And because of that, I feel like the bass is not necessarily better on the Hexa. It's not particularly snappy and sharp and, you know, but it's better controlled, I think. And I think that some of the blooming qualities that you get on the bass here, you don't really get on the Hexa. Mid-range tonality is fantastic on both of these things. Again, if I'm just listening to vocal only content, they both sound fantastic. You do get a better sense of space, better sense of, you know, that technical performance with the KE4. But is it a big difference? I don't know, it's somewhat significant, I would say. But then I would say that the technical performance here on the Explorer is kind of similar to the KE4. In fact, the bass I would say is better. The treble is probably a little bit more incisive on the Explorer, just a little bit more solid and well controlled. And then you've got the Chopin, which again, use your imagination. Where this guy really excels is in the bass attack. The bass is just fantastic and a lot of fun on the Chopin. So if you're looking for the best bass, of the bunch that I have here on the table, the Chopin is, I think, the best. The Explorer would be the next best, and then these two are kind of tied. This is definitely going to be more bass than the Hexa, but I feel like because of that, the Hexa is actually the better balanced of the bunch. Yeah, so in terms of my overall preferences, this is actually where it gets a little bit interesting. My preference of all these IEMs is still going to be actually the Hexa. Even though this is the cheapest IEM that I've got in this little comparison, the Hexa is my favorite. It just sounds fantastic. Next up would probably be the Chopin. Again, the tuning is not, I prefer the new meta tuning to Harman generally, but the execution on the Chopin is just fantastic. It's got good definition, really fun bass, and smooth treble and nice extension. I dig it. And then that brings us to these two. And to be honest, like the more I listen to them, the more I actually just kind of preferred the Explorer. I feel like it's just got a tighter, denser sound. It's just more satisfying, more engaging. And it doesn't have the problems that Harman has, right? It still has like kind of a full lower mid-range. It's not like super bloomy or anything like that, but it's just got a tighter bass presence. And then the Kiwi Ears ends up being, again, if I'm listening to vocal only content, probably the best. But if I'm listening to all of my music library, especially like Cigarettes After Sex again, this would probably just, it's very good, but it would probably be my least favorite here on the table just because of that bass bloom. And what that kind of leads me into thinking, my conclusion here with this IEM is going to be, or the new meta in general, is that when it comes to this new meta tuning, which is, again, kind of a fuller lower mid-range, a lower contrast sound, I think we still have some things to figure out with how to do this mid-range tuning with bass boost. Okay, because this one does it with, this gives you the bass boost and it just kind of detracts a little bit, I think, and it's not the best bass. And the same kind of could have been said for the High Senior Megafest, which I reviewed earlier this year. Also, kind of very similar to the tuning of the KE4, new meta tuning, very good mid-range, bass a little bit on the weak side. And I think that that's just kind of where we're at with this tuning, is like, if you're looking for the best mid-range tuning, I do think that this is it, right? The Hexa is kind of proof of it. This is fantastic tuning. But if you want the Hexa plus bass, you can get it. But when you listen to it, you might realize, is this exactly what I want? I don't know. So maybe the Harman Target still has something to teach us. But anyway, I digress. I need to give this thing a score. Out of 5 stars, look, I still think this thing is fantastic. Out of 5 stars, I'm going to give it a very solid 4 stars. If you want to check out the Kiwi Ears KE4, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and I'll catch you on the next super review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. Let's get into the future.